Hey, sorry you haven't heard from me in a while. I've been busy trying to find out about this place. You're not gonna believe me, and I don't even know if I really believe it myself, but I guess a part of me must, because I'm going. It's far, on an abandoned road, a few miles from that power plant in the mountains. It was hard to find anything about it. I started on message boards, and I ended up in a chat room talking with people who know people who know people who've gone. They said a lot of crazy stuff, but the one thing that they all agreed on is that in that house, there's a room that can take you to the other side.
How far would you go to speak to someone you've lost? Would you travel across a threshold, knowing it's likely you'll never return? Would you risk spending eternity in a dangerous world full of beings who want to snuff out your very soul? If you've experienced grief, you already know the answer. That's because grief is so painful, you can't imagine hurting more, so you feel like you have nothing left to lose. That's Heartworm, a retro-inspired survival horror game that throws you into this other world, and you're not leaving until you get some answers. By the end of this video, you'll definitely get some answers like where on my chainsaw rating system this game lands, and is it good enough as a horror game to have a spot in the upper tiers on my tier ranking list? I'm James, and you're watching Horror 100. I only review horror games after getting 100% of the achievements. Also, I'll never accept a review copy or a sponsorship in the industry. You'll get honest takes on games I bought myself and played all the way through multiple times. You can verify this on my Steam profile in the description. Okay then, follow me. You play as Sam, a young woman consumed by grief after the death of her grandfather. She falls down an internet rabbit hole searching for ways to contact the dead, spending her days and nights scouring forums, chasing leads, and looking for anything that might ease the pain. Eventually, she discovers a message board discussing a house in the mountains with connections to the afterlife, a threshold between our world and the next. There's a problem. No one who's visited this house has ever returned. Sam doesn't care. She's willing to risk losing herself in our reality in order to find closure. This is a 4 to 6 hour experience with multiple endings, fixed camera angles that evoke Resident Evil and Silent Hill, PS1 era aesthetics complete with retro visual filters, and, like Fatal Frame, a camera as your primary weapon instead of the traditional guns and knives of survival horror. In order to better understand what's happening, we need to talk about the setting and atmosphere. Heartworm creates a persistent sense of dread and unease. You have two options that you can experience it with: a clean, modern look that presents the game with sharper clarity, or a retro PS1 filter with pixelation and visual effects that call back to the original PlayStation era. I played with and without the retro filter, and there are merits to both, with the filter having a slight advantage as it sells the throwback aesthetic perfectly. The low poly character models, the environmental detail, the way cutscenes render with that chunky PS1 look. And here's a nice touch that shows attention to detail. The main menu displays a copyright date of 1998, which is a cool Easter egg that shows commitment to the aesthetic. It's these small touches that make you feel like you're playing a lost game from that era. Heartworm is different from most other retro horror games in its use of color. Instead of a foggy gray palette that most games lean on when trying to imitate Silent Hill, Heartworm brings richer colors, like the lush greens in the cornfield area, and there's stark contrast between light and shadow. The world feels more alive, more vibrant, yet still wrong. It's an approach that keeps the atmosphere unsettling without visual monotony. As I mentioned, the game uses fixed camera angles during exploration in classic Resident Evil style. When you pull your camera out to fight, the view switches smoothly to an over-the-shoulder perspective. The transition feels natural, and it allows you to peek into areas the fixed angles don't reveal, which is a smart modernization of the classic formula. The environments themselves are distinct and memorable, each with its own identity. You'll explore an old house, perhaps similar to PT, which unfortunately I haven't played. The house serves as your gateway to beyond, and it's got the same labyrinthine quality where you're constantly unlocking new areas with keys and puzzles and backtracking through familiar halls. There's a neighborhood with intersecting streets, a baseball field, a small store, and an overpass where you catch glimpses of the boss you'll fight later. The wilderness section seems sprawling, at least at first, with different roads to traverse, a boat that serves as a shortcut to a save room, a lookout with a telescope, a watermill area, and dark caves that feel oppressive. And then there's a surreal clock tower that blends hotel, hospital, and school aesthetics in ways that feel like a nightmare. Different rooms connect in impossible ways. The architecture doesn't make logical sense. Each location has its own visual identity, and the clock tower in particular leans into the surreal quality that fits the game's themes about memory and grief distorting reality. It's also heavily inspired by the mansion in the original Resident Evil. If you know, you know. The audio design supports the atmosphere without overpowering it. The score is melancholic, with sparse orchestration that reinforces the emotional weight of Sam's journey. It's quiet, mournful, and introspective. This isn't a game trying to scare you with sudden musical stings or loud noises. Instead, it uses ambient cues like the patrolling of wolves just out of sight to create fear. Enemies that look like they're made of static electricity crackle in empty halls. Distant sounds you can't identify at first, but with time become disturbingly familiar. It's atmospheric horror, and that approach works beautifully for a game about grief. So that's the setting and atmosphere. What about story and themes? Heartworm tackles grief in a way that feels raw. The game confronts the reality that some questions about death and loss simply can't be answered. They can only be endured. There's no magic solution to make everything okay. Grief is messy, impermanent, and changes you forever, and the game respects that truth. Sam's journey is driven by obsession. She's lost her grandfather, who it sounds like raised her, and she can't let go. She can't accept that he's gone. She can't accept that she'll never talk to him again. Can't accept the finality of his death. The internet rabbit hole she falls down feels authentic to how people spiral when consumed by loss. We've all doom-scrolled, but imagine doing it while in mourning. Conspiracy theories, supernatural explanations, anything is fair game if it promises to ease the pain or offer the impossible promise of reunion. The game doesn't judge her for this. It doesn't frame her as foolish or weak. It simply shows you where that obsession leads when you're so desperate for answers that you'll walk through any door, no matter how dangerous. There's a moment in the game that perfectly captures how grief distorts your worldview. Sam walks through the wilderness area and says something like, All this beauty,
fed by decay. I can never look at it the same again.
It's a line that stuck with me because it nails exactly where your mind goes during grief. Everything becomes tinged with loss. Beauty becomes muted. You can't look at nature the same way when you're thinking about decomposition. You can't enjoy anything without it being filtered through the lens of what you lost. That's what grief does. The narrative is abstract, which might be divisive. The locations Sam explores feel more like manifestations of trauma than literal places. You're navigating a psychological landscape as much as a physical one. The house represents the familiar comfort of the past. The neighborhood feels like a distorted version of suburban normalcy. The clock tower, with its impossible architecture, embodies how grief makes time feel broken and meaningless. Life is chaos. Grief requires no physical perspective. The game trusts you to interpret it based on your own personal experiences. Documents discovered during the course of your gameplay add meaningful context, fleshing out the world without over-explaining. You'll piece together information about previous visitors to the house, about the nature of the threshold Sam has crossed, about the price of seeking answers to questions that, deep down, you know are unanswerable. The story earns its emotional beats through atmosphere and theme instead of explicit storytelling, and if you're willing to meet the game on those terms, it works. However, and I hate to say this, but Sam herself doesn't leave much of an impression as a character. The themes of grief resonate powerfully, but Sam as an individual doesn't stick with you. The voice acting is fine, it gets the job done, but you spend relatively little time getting to know her beyond her grief, and while her situation is compelling, she doesn't become a fully realized character with distinctive personality traits. You understand her grief intellectually, but you don't necessarily connect with her emotionally as a person. You feel sorry for her. You feel honored to accompany her on her journey. However, the themes resonate more than the protagonist does, which is a missed opportunity for a game so focused on personal loss. I stated before that the game has multiple endings. How to trigger them, though, is frustratingly obscure. There's no clear indication of what actions lead to which outcomes. I got the bad ending on my first playthrough, and the narrative payoff felt earned, even with that darker conclusion. It felt true to the game's themes about grief not always having happy resolutions. That's the story and themes, which are deep and layered. Let's keep going with gameplay and combat. Heartworm builds its gameplay on classic survival horror foundations, like limited inventory that forces you to make tough decisions about what to carry, puzzle solving that requires attention and thought, resource management that makes every bullet, or in this case every roll of film, precious, strategic combat where knowing when to fight versus when to run becomes crucial. It's a structure fans of the genre will recognize immediately and feel comfortable navigating. Your weapon is a camera, and while this might sound like a Fatal Frame clone, the use is different. You aim with one button, shoot with the other. Simple. It's mechanically more like using a gun than Fatal Frame's time capture system. The combat is position-based without lock-on, which could keep you engaged and mobile. Here though, you can't move while aiming your camera, reminding me of games Heartworm is so obviously inspired by. You need to think and move quickly to get enemies in your line of sight, especially when dealing with multiple threats or fast-moving enemies in tight spaces. The camera has mods you can find that add variety to combat, though I wish there were more of them. The triple exposure mod deals damage 3 times per shot, making it extremely effective and my go-to. It increases your damage output without consuming extra film, which makes it a no-brainer once you find it. The long exposure mod requires you to hold down the button to charge, then release for increased damage. This one's harder to pull off since enemies won't give you the time to charge it safely. I didn't use it much for that reason, but let me know if you used it and how effective it was. The enemy variety impressed me the more I played. Early on, they seemed generic, but as new types were introduced, I appreciated the thought put into making each one feel distinct. Humanoid enemies yell, "Help me," as they activate an attack, an unsettling touch that adds to the atmosphere and makes you wonder if these things were once people or if they're just echoes of suffering. You've got ghost-like creatures that crackle like static electricity, statues that remain perfectly still until you get close, then suddenly come to life and trap you in barriers while attacking with both ranged projectiles and melee strikes. There are wolves that move fast and hit hard, spider-like creatures that will quickly overwhelm you with their speed and numbers if you don't take them down or escape immediately, and slow-moving mannequin enemies that telegraph their attacks but hit devastatingly hard when they connect. Each enemy type requires different tactics, and learning how to handle them efficiently becomes crucial on the harder difficulty, where resources are scarce and mistakes are costly. You know what? Run away. Mostly the answer is to run away. Bosses were okay, but I didn't love fighting them. The first 2 felt unfair. It was difficult to avoid their attacks, and I don't feel like I was learning anything or improving my skills against them. The third and final boss was more gimmicky, but it also felt the most fair. The arenas were remarkable, though I would have liked there to be a way to avoid attacks by ducking behind structures like the cars in the neighborhood boss battles. The puzzles are a highlight, and another way that Heartworm shows its survival horror DNA. Nothing felt unclear or tedious once I understood what the game was asking of me. You'll need to pay attention to environmental details, read documents carefully, make connections between information found in different locations, but the game respects your intelligence. Solutions make sense in retrospect, even when they're tricky in the moment. One stand-up puzzle has you playing chess against a computer for a healing item. A full game. Other chess puzzles have you set up to get checkmate in 1 or 2 moves. And here's something I discovered embarrassingly late. You can view files you've discovered by accessing your Documents menu, which is helpful for puzzle solving when you need to reference information from earlier areas. I spent way too long backtracking to reread things before I realized I could just pull them up on demand. The pacing is tight. At 4 to 6 hours for a playthrough, the game doesn't overstay its welcome. There's no padding like side quests, and there's no artificially extended segments designed to inflate playtime. You're always moving forward, solving puzzles, exploring new areas, or dealing with combat encounters. The game knows exactly how long it needs to be and doesn't waste your time. That's all I need to say about gameplay. Now I need to tell you about the completion journey. Getting 100% completion in Heartworm is challenging, but achievable with patience and practice. The trophy list includes 2 speedrun achievements, one for completing the game in under 2 hours and the other for under 1 hour. If these stack, and I think they probably do, you can potentially get all achievements in 2 runs, though I'd recommend 3 or more. That way you'll experience the game as the devs intended. Hard mode is hard, but not in a cheap way. You get fewer healing items scattered throughout the world, which means every health pack becomes precious. There's no inventory expansion from what I encountered, so you're stuck with limited carrying capacity the entire game, forcing tougher decisions about what to take and what to leave behind. Enemies are significantly tougher to take down. They absorb more damage, they hit harder, and I believe they aggro more easily. Resource management becomes critical. You can't just shoot everything that moves, but I did find that film was in enough abundance that you don't have to worry too much about that. The healing items, though, are rare, and you'll need to become comfortable exploring in low health so you don't waste them. I had to restart my first hard mode attempt because I wasted healing items early on poor decisions and couldn't get past the second boss with the resources I had left. The most difficult achievement for me was the under 1 hour speed run. You need to know every puzzle solution by heart, plan optimal routes through every area to minimize backtracking, and execute with very few mistakes. Every second counts. However, I discovered you can start back at a save point and avoid doing the entire run in one go, which makes it more manageable than I initially thought. You can practice individual segments, optimize your route section by section, and chain together clean executions. It's still demanding, but it's not the nightmarish single-sitting marathon I feared. The no-death run is achievable once you understand enemy patterns, know where threats spawn, and have mastered resource management. It's tense but fair. The game does have some technical issues worth mentioning that can complicate completion attempts. I encountered a bug where a statue enemy died, but the rock hazard that spawned on the ground didn't despawn properly. I couldn't walk around them, I couldn't destroy them, and walking into them killed me, which was particularly frustrating when it happened during what was otherwise a clean run. I also had a weird glitch where defeating a boss didn't put the necessary key item in my inventory to access the next location. The boss died, the cutscene played, but my inventory remained unchanged. I had to reload a save and fight the boss again, and thankfully it worked the second time around, but if this had happened during a no-death or speed run, it could have been a complete run-ender through no fault of my own. One more note about navigation. The map shows which sub-area you're in, like the overlook in the park, but it doesn't provide a cursor showing your exact location within that area. You know you're in the overlook section, but not specifically within that space. This can make navigation trickier than it needs to be, especially in larger environments like the park, where multiple paths twist and interconnect. I found myself getting turned around more than once, unsure if I was heading toward my objective or back where I came from. Despite these issues, the game is technically stable overall. No crashes, the desktop, solid and consistent performance throughout, no game-breaking bugs that permanently block progress. For a focused 4 to 6 hour experience from a small development team, the completion journey feels appropriately challenging without being unfair or artificially padded. I did play this game on Steam Deck a lot, and it worked well. It earned its verified status on Steam. It's not all roses here, though. I have some criticisms. While Heartworm succeeds in many areas and earns its recommendation, it has some notable shortcomings worth addressing honestly. The camera mods felt underutilized and represent a missed opportunity for build variety. You get triple exposure, which is excellent, becomes your default, and long exposure, which is situational and harder to use effectively. And that's it. 2 mods for the entire game. More variety here would have allowed for different playstyles, like maybe a wide-angle mod for crowd control, maybe a zoom mod for safe long-range combat, maybe a mod that slows enemies or creates environmental effects. As it stands, you'll find that triple exposure mod fairly early, realize it's superior to the default camera in almost every situation, and stick with it for the rest of the game with little reason to experiment. Combat depth suffers as a result. The bosses connect to the story only in abstract, symbolic ways, which feels thematically appropriate but unsatisfying. While they work okay as gameplay challenges, the thematic connection feels loose and undefined. If you're looking for bosses that clearly tie into specific story beats or represent explicit concepts from Sam's journey, you'll be left wanting. They're more like atmospheric encounters than narrative milestones, which works for the game's abstract approach, but also means they don't contribute much to the understanding of the story. The story itself could be more fleshed out, causing the abstract narrative to become a double-edged sword. It works thematically since grief and death don't have clear answers, so the game mirrors that ambiguity in its storytelling. But there's a line between meaningfully abstract storytelling that rewards interpretation and simply being underexplained. Heartworm sometimes feels like it's walking that line, and which side it falls on will depend on your tolerance for ambiguity. Some players will find the abstract approach compelling and thematically resonant. Others will finish the game feeling like they didn't understand what happened or what it all meant. I lean toward the former, but I can see how someone could feel frustrated by the lack of concrete answers. The technical issues, while not game-breaking or frequent, are worth noting because they can impact critical moments. The statue enemy hazard bug that killed me, and the boss item glitch that forced a reload show that some rough edges remain. These aren't deal breakers, but they're the kind of polish issues that can turn a great experience into merely a good one. These problems, plus Sam being a bit forgettable, don't make it bad, but they do prevent it from reaching the heights of genre standouts like Crow Country, which manages to nail both the retro aesthetic and modern quality of life improvements while telling a more cohesive story. Heartworm is a solid entry in the retro horror space. It's a good game that respects its inspirations, but not an exceptional one that transcends them. Now, let's talk about my final verdict. Heartworm is a solid experience that successfully captures what made 90s survival horror special. At $15 for a focused 4 to 6 hours, it offers good value for horror fans looking for something that respects the classics without simply copying them beat for beat. But it's not without its flaws. Sam is a forgettable protagonist despite the strong themes she's meant to embody. The story walks the line between purposefully abstract and underexplained in ways that will frustrate some players. The camera combat works well, but could have been expanded significantly with more mod options to allow for build variety and different playstyles. It's because of this that the game earns a gold chainsaw. When considering my tier ranking, I see Heartworm as a solid, respectable experience worth your time and money, but not genre-defining or revolutionary. If you love retro horror games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, if you're drawn to dark narratives about grief and loss that don't offer easy answers, or if you just want a tight, focused horror experience that doesn't overstay its welcome and respects your time, Heartworm is absolutely worth checking out. It won't revolutionize the genre or blow your mind, but it earns its place among solid modern entries, keeping classic survival horror alive and relevant. Heartworm ranks in the B tier. For horror gamers and dark narrative enthusiasts, this is an easy recommendation. Just know what you're getting into. A respectful homage to 90s survival horror that succeeds more often than it stumbles, with strong atmosphere and interesting themes, but also a forgettable protagonist with some missed opportunities for deeper systems. That's it, guys. Write your scary thoughts in the comments, and please, make sure you like and subscribe so I can stay motivated to bring you more thoughtful commentary on horror games. Be safe, check your closets and under your beds before you go to sleep, and I'll be back soon.